Good evening. Welcome to the Board of Selectmen's meeting for Tuesday, March 4th, 2014. Just an announcement that this meeting is being recorded. We'd like to take a moment of appreciation before we start for our brave servicemen and women that are serving in Afghanistan. Thank you. Our big item agenda tonight is to discuss the special meeting that's coming up on March 10th about the State Hospital. So we have the Warrant Committee here, and we have members of the State Hospital Advisory Committee here to chat a little bit about the project and about the town meeting article. And I guess I will turn it over to Steve Nolan, Steve, and you can take it from there. Thank you.
By way of history, last week, Thursday night, the State Hospital Advisory Committee met, and we actually took a vote on whether we would recommend the purchase or not, and we voted 10-3 in favor. Well, one member was absent. We then had an informational session last night at the middle school. I counted roughly 42 people, somewhere in that vicinity, in addition to probably a dozen members of my committee and other people involved with the hospital or selectmen or what have you. So there were about 50 people there in total. And that was a pretty good session, I thought. We went through this presentation and then opened it up to questions, and it probably went for about an hour and a half, so it was a pretty good airing of a lot of the subjects. So I thought if you care to, I would run quickly through the slides that we had done, just to kind of give you a sense of what we've put together. We're sort of, this is kind of evolving over the course of the week as we get some feedback on some of the slides, what works, what doesn't work, but this is sort of the gist of what we would probably present at town meeting next week. A decision matrix here reflecting the fact that we have first the town meeting vote, followed by the town election, both of which have to pass for Medfield to take control of the property, and if not, it stays with DCAM. We have a picture of the properties to be transferred, which was in the flyer that we sent to everybody in town, so we're just trying to make sure everybody does know what the parcels are that we're buying, A and B here, and that the other parcels are remaining with the state. Next we have a couple of photos, so just showing the core campus, which again is parcel A, and for identification the Sledding Hill, which we call parcel B. The next slide is just an explanation in really basic terms of the partnership model and how it would apply here. So again, the purchase price for the two parcels, $3.1 million, spread over the 10 years. If we resell any portion of those parcels to a third party, we would split the net proceeds with the state. The baseline share is 50-50. And when we say net proceeds, if we expended money, for instance, on a consultant, or we were just talking, Mike and I, about a building demolition. If in the meantime we had to demolish a building or do something else, or care and maintenance of the property, those costs would all get deducted first before we shared with the state. The one thing of clarification, though, we don't share, the $3.1 million is a sunk cost that we don't get to take out as sale proceeds. That was an educational point that we had with the state. When I went into it, I assumed partnership, well, we'll share everything, including our upfront, but they said no, the sharing starts after the 3.1, so that's our cost. So we would literally have to sell for 6.2 net, and then we'd split it, and then by then we'd have recovered our 3.1, so it sets the bogey a little higher. There are some incentives in the partnership model, and you could max out at 70% if you actually adopted as-of-right zoning, did a comprehensive market study, I can't remember, there were a couple others, and you sold within 2 years. So it's a pretty, it calls for a pretty tough schedule to get that additional percentage, but we could get up to 70%. No restrictions on the development of the core campus, which is parcel A. Parcel B, the 12 acres of the Sledding Hill property could be developed under this arrangement with the Department of Agriculture, and we could build one building on that, which is the idea would be a town building of some kind, maybe a park and rec. We don't know, but it would be restricted to only one building, and the closing date of before the end of the year. And then we have a little bit of a discussion of how the property would be reused. I think we've talked before about our visioning session we had in January, which was a really productive meeting, and these are some of the uses that came out of this. We've gotten a visioning report back from our consultant, and this is a summary of some of the uses that were sort of the consensus, which would be mixed housing, senior assisted living, a continuing care retirement community, single-family homes and townhouses, some affordable housing, some neighborhood retail, light commercial, pretty much dependent on what else goes up there. Maybe a recreational building on the sledding hill is possible, passive recreation and agricultural. The performing arts center or cultural center of some kind in the chapel, if we can afford it or figure out how to work it into a broader development plan. A lot of people like that idea quite a bit. And then open space and trail connections to sort of integrate the property even when it's redeveloped with the surrounding area of the town so it doesn't become isolated. Next we have, this was the visioning plan that the consultants put together. During the visioning session we had paper maps of the entire site, which we, each of the 11 tables I think we had, did some sketches about where they would lay things out, and it was quite amazing the level of consistency of ideas. So this was kind of what they put together, sort of a synthesis of those various ideas. So it's still kind of a high-level plan, but at least it just showed a pretty good consensus in the town for the types of things that people would like to see up there. So we just included that sort of as a snapshot of that. Opportunities and concerns. These are pretty much taken right out of the flyer that we sent to the everyone in the town. If we're in favor of the purchase, some of the opportunities are we control the scale, size, type of development, all the details. A1 and A2, which are on either side of the core campus, would remain as open space. The ability to address specific wants and needs of Medfield, things like reaching, closer to the 40B 10%, doing the park and rec building, other, preserving the chapel if possible, things like that, and develop revenue-generating assets and community facilities. Concerns are unanticipated remediation costs, unforeseen carrying costs, potential liabilities, and then delays in reaching a consensus on a master plan. On the flip side, a vote against the purchase opportunity, the most significant one is no short-term financial exposure to the town. We wouldn't incur the $3.1 million. We wouldn't incur any of the maintenance costs annually. So short-term benefit, but longer-term concerns are loss of control, again, the flip side, possibility of large 40B development that we might not control. I did some math here just for illustration. I think I've explained this to everybody before, but 40B has a somewhat bizarre way of counting affordable housing units. If there's a rental project, 100% of the units count on the 40B inventory, regardless of how many are affordable. On home ownership, only the affordables are added. So if you envision the same 100-unit project, if it's developed as rental and it has 25 affordable, 75 market, all 100 count on the inventory, somewhat bizarrely. But if you did it as home ownership, same project, only the 25 affordable count, not the 100. So you don't get nearly the bang for the buck. So my rough math, which I think Mike has agreed with, is we're short 170 units roughly. So that would be a 170-unit rental project could get us to 10%. And on the other hand, if you did home ownership, because the incremental gain is so small, the math shows you had to have 968 home ownership units to reach the 10%. So the swing is huge depending on which type of...
Steve, does that 170 figure count the projected 40B on West Street?
Yes.
It does.
Both these numbers assume that the West Street 40B gets developed. Yeah. Thank you. I forgot to point that out. Other concerns, long-term costs of services to a development that we might not control, and then limited input on legislation pertaining to parcels A1 and A2. I bring that up because the A1 and A2 under the state's polling are to go to Department of Conservation and Recreation. We're going to try to build into the legislation language that reserves those for those kind of purposes, so that there's no bait and switch that we end up buying the core campus and the others get sold to who knows what. So we're going to try to include that in the legislation. DCAM isn't wild about that concept, but our state legislators are all on board with it, so we're going to try to get that worked in. We don't exactly know what the process how it'll unfold, but at least that's our hope. So. Next slide, I'll go over this quickly, but this is a sort of summary of some of the findings in the Lozano-Baskin report, which was done 10 years ago by DCAM about the structure of the buildings and their condition, which found that they were in pretty rough shape then, fair condition at best, I think was the quote. it highlighted what the Historic District Commission has told us about the campus layout as being one of the most historic and significant features of the property, and that's one thing that they would like to preserve, and that was reflected also in this report, which includes the 19 buildings right around the quad plus 4 outlying buildings. So it's sort of those 23 buildings, which I think Mike Taylor refers to as the buildings that they most like to save if possible. But again, the report said that the buildings needed to be mothballed appropriately, which unfortunately they really weren't. So we expect there's continuing degradation of the buildings since the study was done. We have put together an RFP that went out recently. We actually went out once already, but I think because of the scope and the price not lining up, we didn't get any bidders, so we refined it and sent it out again. So we're hoping to get an update on 4, I'd say, representative buildings so that we can kind of get a sense of how they've changed over the intervening 10 years. Yeah. The tax impact for the purchase, what I did here was with Mike and Christine's help, we took the $310,000 purchase and then a carrying cost number of $150,000, and there's been some debate about that number, so I'm trying to figure out what the consensus number should be, and maybe Gus had suggested maybe we just do a range here. But anyway, this is an example at least of what the 310 plus 150 a year for carrying costs would produce for an impact on different size homes. $68 per year for a $350,000 home, $104 for $550,000, and $161 for an $850,000 home. Those numbers would go up a bit if we use a higher number for the annual carrying costs. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing I'm trying to work out this week with Gus, so that we can have a consensus approach on how to model what the impact on taxes would be. Mm-hmm. I sketched out a few scenarios which are really more for illustration than for any sense of reality, because the numbers are largely picked out of the air. But we envisioned a Medfield controlled development of 120 senior units, 120 40B housing units. One of the things that came out of our visioning session is a real desire to try and address the lack of options for people 55 and older who are selling their homes and then can't find anything else to buy, so they move to, I guess, to Norfolk is what I'm hearing. So they call this some development over there Little Medfield, because there's so many people from Medfield who have sold and moved. Mm-hmm. So we envision maybe some of that housing, some 40B to get us closer. So we kind of spun out some numbers, and I made sort of conservative estimates like 1.2 school-age children per household. Some people say, well, it'll be much higher than that. Maybe it will be, but at least for illustration, I just took that number and ran it out again at the average per pupil cost. So that's not going to be the marginal cost. It may be a little different, but again, it was for illustration purposes. This produces $1.7 million per year in educational expenses, $800,000 more a year in just general expenses. But increased tax revenue to offset that. Again, it depends on how expensive the units are, but sure, at the prices here, $1.7 million of tax revenue. So basically, this would still cost the town $800,000 a year under those assumptions. Again, that's a lot of guesswork in there, but if the next 2 slides sort of show other scenarios. So we sort of doubled that number, assuming we'd lost control of this. So instead of a 240-unit project, it turned into a 480-unit project. And instead of having a senior component, it was all family housing. So yep, the demand from students is much higher. Since you have a deficit for every unit, if you assume you double the unit, your deficit's a lot bigger. So when you do the math again, this produces a net cost of $5.2 million. And then I did the sort of worst case scenario, which I don't think is very likely, but for illustration purposes, if you run it out to that 968 all for home ownership units, mm-hmm, which is kind of extreme, but the net cost there is $11 million per year, net negative. So it's just to show the progression that the more units you force onto the site, right, it tends to have a negative impact on taxes. We spent a fair amount of talk about demolition and abatement costs. We had asked ECAM for a number of what they estimated the demolition costs would be based on their actual experience of demolishing buildings, mm-hmm, of a similar vintage on this campus and on other campuses. Mm-hmm. And they gave us this range of $11 to $14 a square foot, and that's assuming prevailing wages. So based on that, if you really thought the town was just going to demolish all the buildings eventually, there's around 600,000 square feet of buildings, so it produces a range of $6.6 to $8.4 million of demolition costs. And there's people who suggest it may be higher than that. There's some unknowns, although we do have a pretty exhaustive asbestos survey of the buildings that DCAM did. So we do have a lot of good data on what the actual asbestos content up there is. Again, the remediation of the hazardous, what I call hazardous disposal sites, is going to be completed by DCAM, so we're not assuming that cost. These costs are really just for the buildings themselves and whatever hazardous materials are in the buildings. And then I just point out in the last bullet that our vision of how to dispose of this would be we'd dispose of it with the buildings in place, so that the developer would net what he or she thought was the demolition cost out of the price. So we would recognize a smaller price, but the town wouldn't get involved in the actual demolition. It has another advantage in that if we did it, we'd have to pay prevailing wages, which are generally higher. Most developers won't be paying prevailing wages, so their costs would presumably be lower than the DCAM estimates. Mm-hmm. So I put in here just one slide, slide 18, on a potential sales strategy. Again, hearkening back to the 120 unit senior, 120 unit 40B, which I used as an example before. The assessors have given me some numbers, and I've taken a few liberties with them because I've put them in this fashion slightly differently than they gave me the numbers. So I've got to confirm with them that my numbers haven't gotten out of whack due to the way I backed into some of these numbers, but basically, if you did a series of single-family dwellings, which was part of the vision, and then did a mix of senior condos, for instance, and then 120 units of family apartments, so again, it comes back to that 240 unit scenario, the sale prices add up to, as you can see there, $5.4 million on the single-family lots, $2.3 on the condos, $3.2 on the apartments. I've assumed the top end of the demolition range that DCAM gave us, so I think that's a pretty significant overstatement of what likely the cost is, but for this purpose I assumed sort of worst case scenario there. So the aggregate sales prices net of those demolition costs would be $2.6 million, and then assuming no other costs or other sharing, we'd get back $1.3 million. So we would still lose on that. You lose $2 million roughly from what you'd put in, but so again, you could force the number up higher, a number of units up higher to try and get more, or maybe these are conservative enough that you would do this and you would make more than I'm projecting, because I'm trying to be conservative here. But basically addressing the fact that we could control the development and still get out of this without significant negative impact on the town. Mm-hmm. Legislative timetable, which is quite tight, and I think you're all aware of that, the need to get the legislation filed so it can pass before, assuming the town meeting vote is positive and the town election vote is positive. So we'd have a pretty limited amount of time to get legislation through. So that's one of the reasons for the sense of urgency in getting the special town meeting going. And last thing is our recommendation. So the vote, what we did when we took our vote was we went around the table, everybody gave their vote and then gave some of their reasons. And so I've summarized that because a lot of the yes votes, a number of the yes votes I should say, were couched in terms of yes, but the town really needs to be aware of the need to do a redevelopment plan, and to really get the master planning going quickly, and to work on a disposition plan quickly, so that we don't end up getting stuck in some inertia and not really do anything with the property and just let it continue to waste and cause a greater impact on taxpayers. So that was the real sense that we should do that. Then we should move to expeditiously rezone and do an RFP process to dispose of the property and have it redeveloped in the way we want. And then also just to make sure the voters were educated. So part of the reason for the lengthy presentation is to convey some of the concerns, the positives and negatives, just so everybody sort of knows what we're voting on. But I think the real sense of the committee is we strongly support it, as long as everyone goes into it understanding that we really need to be proactive in the redevelopment plan. So that's the gist of our recommendation. So happy to answer questions and
really good.
Answer questions from the warrant committee too.
July 1st, that should be July 30th on the legislative timeframe.
Well, that was the target is to July 1, have the enactment into law no later than July 31, because that there is a little bit of wiggle room there of a month, but July 31, sort of the legislation has to be passed and enacted, or the legislature basically goes out of session for the rest of the year.
You have your estimated carrying cost of $460 a year for 10 years, 150 carrying cost and 2/10 the purchase price.
Right.
And then if it's developed with the 120 senior housing and 120 40B, it's going to be a net cost $800,000 a year.
Yeah, that would be in addition, although, you know, we,
So it would be
depends
more
on what we
effective for the town to
recovered.
buy it and do nothing from a tax standpoint than buy it and develop it.
Except we've got buildings we've got to demolish that we have to
Yeah,
take
I mean,
care
the
of at some
downside
point.
is if you do nothing, then you're stuck with these wasting assets that eventually something's going to happen if
When
they
would we
start.
have to demolish them by?
There's no specific timeline. I mean, it's you have to keep them secure. If they start to fall apart, then you're probably going to have to take them down. But I couldn't sit here today and say, well, you have to take them all down within X years. It's kind of an unknown.
Or if someone filed a complaint against the town, they could order them taken down or corrected.
There are other hospitals where there's been no pressure to do that. Several other hospitals where the buildings stay there.
Only takes one.
Just curious, the three who voted against the approving it or recommending it, what was the general consent? Was there a consensus as to why?
One was based strictly on tax increase, that the fact that we would have to pay something. So, I think that's, from my perspective, that's a bit of a short-term view of things, because sure, we're going to pay some more if we buy it and have to maintain it in the short term, but the long-term impact of a much larger development, to me, would greatly outweigh that short-term risk. But that was one of the votes. The other two, I think, were largely based on a pessimistic view of the town's willingness to redevelop the site, that we will never vote to build housing anywhere in town, and therefore that we shouldn't do this because it's just we're going to be locked into never doing anything with the property. So that, I'm not trying to overstate it. That's actually, I think, kind of a summary of the argument. And my counter argument to that is that, number one, I don't believe that, I'm not so pessimistic. I was involved with the Allendale development over on Dale Street. We got a unanimous town vote for the town to do that development. This is a site that's already been developed once and is being redeveloped. So I think one of to paraphrase the argument, it's nobody here ever votes to build on any open space. But and that when we did a survey of the town on our website without any kind of information session, and we got us, pretty broad range of different views of what to do. And there were like 34% of people said, or 38%, I can't remember what the number is, said it should be open space, and 34% said it was senior housing. And so the argument is that either of those groups could block the other group because we need a 2/3 vote to rezone. But when we had our visioning session, what we were struck by was the amount of consensus actually on what should be done, because once people learned about the site, how much of it was still going to remain as open space, what the redevelopment ideas were, that it was really focused on the core campus that's already been developed. It was amazing the degree of consistency in people's approach. So I gave that answer last night, and somebody came up to me afterwards and said, that was me. I on the survey, I said open space, and then I came to the visioning session and saw looked at the property, saw the constraints, and then thought that this redevelopment plan was the way to go. So I think the uninformed answers to the survey, I don't put a lot of stock in that. I think once people understand what the plan is, people buy into it. So anyway, but that's a summary of the no votes.
I was there last night, and one of the issues that came up is one of the people who said they were against it was the rezoning. And they
Right.
thought actually that they wanted to rezone before the purchase took place. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, I mean, one of the arguments is, well, you got the cart before the horse. You ought to rezone and then buy. And I guess I'd say in an ideal world that sounds good, but the reality is we've been presented with this approach, and we have sort of a limited window to do this year. We lose the current administration. This is their initiative. And in the past, there had been a lot of resistance at the state to selling this property to the town. So we have this window where the state has said, yeah, we're willing to go forward with you, but here's the timetable we have to meet before the legislature changes, and more importantly, the governor changes. So a lot of us feel like this is an opportunity we don't want to waste, and if in an ideal world, we'd spend a lot more time planning. And in fact, one of our early proposals to DCAM was, well, we'll just take an option to buy this, and then we'll go do our planning. And they said, no, you're all in or not. So they rejected that idea, which would have been a great idea, because then it would have given us the flexibility of doing all our planning and then buying, but that wasn't going to happen. So, and then the other issue is sort of, there is a risk to rezoning before you know you're going to control the property. You know, what do? You can't really adopt two different zoning plans. Here's the zoning plan if we buy it and what we want to do, and here's the zoning plan if somebody else gets it. It's kind of a complicated undertaking, so not to mention just the timing of it wasn't really going to work. So,
If you could just describe the process by which the town could be forced to demolish a building by the filing of a complaint, because Joanna and I had a call yesterday on behalf of the Warrant Committee on this issue of what the risk is of some unexpected expense from the environmental liability. And the suggestion from that call was pretty low, and there was kind of a low chance that we'd ever have to be forced to demolish the buildings without a developer. Could you explain what you meant by that, Mike, and just walk through that process?
You might be forced to take remedial action, which could involve demolition, or it could involve cleaning up the site to the extent that it was no longer in violation of federal or state environmental laws. So it might.
But I guess who would initiate that process, and how would you be required by whom?
Any citizen could file a complaint with either EPA or DEP for enforcement action.
What I meant by that was that you could also have a situation where the buildings, right now they're boarded up, and so one of the costs the town will have is to make sure we police it and keep it boarded up so that people can't get into it, because there's really no health risk if people are kept out of the buildings, but if we leave them open to the elements and people get in, then they're exposed to asbestos, or they might, fall through the floor and break their neck or whatever. So if the buildings get so decayed that, the walls start to crumble or whatever, then I think you could be faced with a situation where we would want to affirmatively demolish it so that we avoid the situation, that the thing just falls in on itself. But that to me is a much longer term concern, because it doesn't look like any of them are an immediate risk of falling apart. But if you really just sat here forever and didn't do anything, sooner or later, the interiors are going to start to crumble, and then who knows what will happen. So,
and there is one other issue too. Our initial attempt to secure liability insurance on the property failed. We have our insurance carrier said they would not insure the building for liability. They are sending out a loss control representative on Monday to go through the site and give us recommendations as to what could be done to increase the opportunities to obtain insurance in the private sector. And they said they would assist us in trying to obtain liability insurance in the private sector. So there is that potential risk that if it became an attractive nuisance and some were injured, it could be a problem.
Did I hear you correctly in that the open spaces, lots A1 and A2, the state could change their mind and that wouldn't be open space? Did you?
Well, I don't think so, but people have asked the question, so they say, what's the guarantee? So the way things have evolved when the state, this is all things I've learned from DCAM and our state legislators, when the state wants to dispose of a big property like this, they do what they call polling, and they send notice to all the agencies at the state and say, we're going to sell this, does anybody want it? And DCR, Conservation and Recreation, wanted A1 and A2. So the idea is that's who will get them when the property is disposed. To make sure that's a guarantee, we'd like to make sure that's in the legislation, so that that's the use that those are dedicated to, so that there can't be any slip up where suddenly DCR changes its mind, it doesn't take them, and then there's a whole other disposition going on of A1 and A2. So it's kind of a worst case scenario, but people have asked the question, so we figured let's try to be as proactive about that as possible.
Can expand on that.
Greg, we on behalf of the town asked for the A1 and A2 properties to come to the town, and we were told that no, that the town couldn't have them because DCR wanted them.
Right.
It seems like they're pretty well at DCR at this point.
I'd like to expand on that a little bit as well. The current legislation for the 440-unit development, which passed in 2008, calls out disposition of all of the parcels, including parcels A1 and A2, as well as the parcels that were to be purchased. That would be parcels A and B. The existing legislation will go through to the effect of, notwithstanding any prior legislation, parcels A and B will be sold. It does not say anything about rescinding the disposition of parcels A1 and A2. So I understand the need or the concern about having a belt and suspenders on that, but it already exists in the legislation and will continue to exist after this purchase legislation of parcels A and B goes through. Now, as to how hard DCAM would fight to make sure that that property went to DCR, in our negotiations, I had asked for a piece of the DCR land to come to the town to make up for the water tower land, and the word back from DCR was absolutely not. We are not going to get into a confrontation with DCR. This property is going to DCR. Right, so, I mean, I'm 99.9% confident that the existing legislation will cover the appropriate disposition of parcels A1 and A2.
A little bit by way of background on that, too. The original reason for DCR wanting the land is the Department of Agriculture has a policy of no net loss of agricultural land. This is part of their inventory of agricultural land. If they would dispose of this property, they would have a net loss of agricultural land, so they wanted to keep this property. They didn't even want to give us the right to put a building on the sledding hill, but what they have agreed to on that is that we would put a conservation restriction on some other piece of town-owned land equivalent to the 12 acres that we'd be allowed to build on. Once that land goes to DCR, Department of Agriculture, it becomes what's known as, I believe it's Chapter 97 or Clause 97 land, which is a part of the Massachusetts Constitution that says any Chapter 97 land to have a change of use requires, I don't know, it's a 2/3 or an 8/10 vote, a standing vote, roll call vote of both branches of the Massachusetts legislature. So can it be changed? I'd never say never that it couldn't be, but it would be very, very difficult once it became Chapter 97 land to change its use.
Gil Rogers, much of that land is categorized as prime agricultural soil, and we have the maps that show it. So, for example, A2 on the west side was the main source of vegetable and gardens for the farm, and that's prime agricultural soil. So it's very clear that that's, was used historically for agricultural purposes.
And there's no contamination in either
No,
of those sites?
everything's been cleaned up on that site. And the other point I'd like to make, too, is I've looked at legislation from other state hospitals, and that often in the legislation that's written when they do the transfer, they write explicit provisions in that legislation that this will only be used for example, agriculture or open space or conservation purposes. They don't leave it vague, and that's why I think that it's important that it be explicit.
Let me just expand on that question that you just asked about the environmental conditions. The A2 parcel also includes the construction and demolition debris area down by the river. That will be cleaned according to the schedule that we're currently working out now. DCAM's going through their permitting processes. That will be cleaned, and the work will be completed hopefully the end of this year. They will come back in the spring to look at how the plants that they put in made it through the winter and everything else. They have agreed that they will monitor it for 5 years. At the end of 5 years, the C&D area will go to the Department of Conservation and Recreation. So DCAM, the people who are doing it, have already acknowledged that that area is going to go to DCR. But DCAM will maintain responsibility for the area where they're rebuilding the hillside, where they're putting in the rain gardens and all of the, the promontories and what have you, that they will maintain that in perpetuity. So that will pretty much clean up just about everything on the A2 parcel. There's one item left on the core campus, and this is a CVOC plume that started at the site of the old former laundry building, which has been torn down. They're in the process of remediating that, and they should be finished with that within the next couple of months. There will be no other statewide DEP contamination issues on either parcels A or in the Sledding Hill or in the rest of the areas that the state's going to maintain.
So, for example, if the state wanted to allow farming on any of those sites and essentially turning over a soil,
no problem.
there would be no problem.
No.
One of the things that the town should look into is actually asking the state if we could site a town farm up there on those A1, A2 parcels. I mean, they're perfect places to have a community
That's one of
spread agricultural farm
We had
the
raised
town
that with DCAM because we
supports.
said, we actually wanted to be as strong as we had a right of refusal to do something up there and get a license up there. They pushed back a little bit, but said they wouldn't mind cooperating with us in that regard. But to get a real a real CSA up there, you'd need a longer term. They're in the habit of giving people annual licenses, but nobody really wants to put that kind of investment in unless they get a longer term arrangement. It's kind of crazy. So one of the things I'm hoping to do is negotiate with them to get something like that going, because I think it would be a great thing for the town if we could do that. But
The thing that is scaring me a little bit is this legislative timetable. This is the second year of a 2-year cycle in the legislature, and kind of like a high school student, the legislature waits to the very last moment to do anything. And the month of April is all budget, so that's gone. So now you have basically May and June, and you have all these budgets coming in, and that's the only concern I have. And I think A1 and A2, ideally, it would be ideal if that would always have some kind of restrictions that DCR would have that, and it sounds like there's like a 99% chance that's going to do that. I just wouldn't want anything that is going to slow this down the slightest bit, because I think if we don't get this through by July 30th, we're not going to get this, whether it passes town meeting and the election or not. And that's what's scaring me with this. That's why we really got to need our state legislators to really carry the ball here.
To that point, Mr. DeSorga, I talked this afternoon with Senator Timothy on this very item, and he is confident, as I think Mr. Massaro stated, that the polling and the earlier legislation safeguards the town against it. He is not in any way opposed to later on addressing this in maybe separate legislation if there was a cause to do that. But he's confident that it's okay here, and his fear is that if we burden the legislation with any problems that DCAM is going to then prolong this in this next round of negotiating, because all this article is doing at town meeting is us authorizing the Board of Selectmen to proceed if and when there is an agreement that is satisfactory to the town. It doesn't, a vote positive at the town meeting doesn't buy the land. So we still have rounds of negotiating with the state to finalize the language of the agreement. That legislation can be, of course, submitted while that negotiation is going on. But what we don't want to do is delay anything here. Mr. DeSorga is completely correct that the timetable is very short, and we've learned in just getting the water tower and wellfield legislation through, which is not yet enacted, but will be very soon, I am told on the authority of the state senator who represents us, that it will be done before the regular town meeting. We had hoped to get it done before this special. That's not going to happen, but it's very close. It's out of the committees. It needs engrossment and enactment in both houses, and they are not in formal session all the time, so there's just procedural problems right now. But we're assured that that will be, that legislation which we passed at the last town meeting will be effected soon. On this legislation, the timetable is very tight. The senator says he can get it through. It will start in the House this time, which seems to be a quicker route for legislation to move if it starts in the House. It's the more usual way, he tells me. And it will go through the House with Representative Garlick sponsoring it, and up to the Senate after that. And he thinks we can get it through as long as there are no delays.
Again, why some of the urgencies here and everything else. The actual draft of the legislation that I have here says, in the event that the town does not complete its purchase by 12/31/14, the Commissioner of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance may sell, lease the property described in Section 1 pretty much immediately. So the legislation's already written that says if we don't reach agreement, if we don't settle everything else, DCAM's ready to go. I mean, they'll go out in the street, and she's authorized to seek competitive proposals for the purchase of the property. So they're going to get rid of the property. They're going to get rid of the property quickly. And it's up to us whether we want to be
part of that or not? If I'm looking at, it says under the partnership model, purchase parcels A and B for $3.1 million, includes interest spread over 10 years at $310,000 per year. Essentially, this is being financed by the state?
Correct.
Okay. And then my question is, what happens in year 5 we sell it? Are we still on the hook of paying the interest for the whole 10 years?
I mean, it's a flat, I mean, basically, they're not charging us interest effectively. So, yeah, they would say 3.1 is the purchase price. So if we sold, you know, we'd still have to pay the balance of the purchase price.
So there's 0% interest?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that whatever financing costs there are built into it. So they said that they had a one-time financing charge or something that they were building into the numbers. So
Okay, so there's
bit of-
fees, but there's no zero interest for them.
Yeah, we can't really prepay for a reduced price, I guess is what your question is. We have to pay the 310.
Okay.
What they are proposing to do is subtract it from our local aid, our cherry sheet aid, the $310 per year. That does create a bit of a problem in that it would put us over our levy limit. So we have spoken to the Department of Revenue, and they said they would allow us to insert in the legislation a provision that if the voters vote to override the $310,000 a year payment as they would with a debt exclusion override, they would allow us to add that to the excluded levy. In other words, basically, they're saying you have to treat it as debt, and if you want to exclude it from your levy limit calculation, then you have to go to the voters and have a vote on it.
So are you saying that every year we have to, in the town meeting, have this $310,000?
No, you do it once, like you do with a 20-year bond. You vote to override Proposition 2.5 to allow it to be excluded from the levy limit calculation. That is good for the life of the...
But if by some chance you disposed of the major portion or all of the property within 5 years or whatever, and you made the $3 million plus back and everything else, could you essentially pay off that?
Put it in the bank. If you got a zero interest loan.
Yes, yeah, why would you want to? Yeah.
Well, except it is coming off the cherry sheet, though, right?
It is coming off the cherry sheet, but by putting it on the ballot as a debt exclusion, you recoup the money that is coming off the cherry sheet.
Okay. I just wanted to understand how the mechanics.
Yeah.
Thank you.
They didn't understand it because they've never done this before. And Westboro doesn't need it. Westboro had $3.2 million unused tax levy, so they could have paid for it outright if they wanted to. So.
Questions from the warrant committee? No? Okay. All right. I think we're all set. Good. Yeah. Great. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Steve, thank you for the...
Yeah, I'd just like to thank the committee. I know how many hours they spend on this, and I think it's a tremendous job they've done, and I hope people realize that and go to town meeting and listen to the presentations. So.
We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
We would like to thank the selectmen for letting us have half of our work committee.
We did expect you to bring the refreshments.
Mr. Chairman, do we, does the board at this time take a vote on this, or we have before the
I think it's
meeting?
appropriate if we do. I would move that we vote to support the purchase of the Medfield State Hospital.
Okay, you have a second?
I will second that.
Great, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, action items. We need to take a vote to sign the March 31st, 2014 warrant for the annual town election.
And this includes the debt exclusion override vote that you voted to put on a few weeks ago.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. Next up, Mr. DeSorga would like to have us discuss the Main Street sidewalk in front of Roach Brothers.
Yeah, I just was concerned. I sent each of you the letter I received from Ted Cannon, who's the lawyer for Roach Brothers. This has been going on since October. It's, as you know, a project that was initiated and approved by the Aesthetics Committee. It was endorsed by this board as well. And we've just kind of delayed here. And what bothers me is that Roach Brothers is feeling that they don't have the faith that we're going to be able to finish this in time. And what they're proposing instead is to delay to a year from this summer of 2015. Again, Roach Brothers has donated to the town some $30,000. Was willing to do a lot of this work. So I just want to make sure that it's not the summer of 2015 and we're back at this same point again. So our schedule and our plate is full till after the April town meeting. What I would like to recommend is that in maybe the second meeting in May, if maybe Evelyn could set up that we would have the Aesthetics Committee, Ken Feeney, representatives of Roach Brothers, come into the Selectmen, just so we can get everything clear and straight and a timeline of what we need to do to get this done by the summer of 2015. So that would be my recommendation on that.
That certainly seems reasonable. I think that's probably a very good idea to get everyone together.
You know, it's still possible that they might be able to do it this spring. I think one of the concerns was, while the construction is going on in Roach Brothers, you're going to have the back parking lot parked off. So the way that the kids normally get to the library or get to downtown after school is to cut across that parking lot. That's not going to be accessible. There was some concern that while school is in session, the sidewalk is going to be dug up. How would you provide a safe route for the kids when they get out of school to go to the center? I think the suggestion was that if they could wait until school was out, they could probably do it in 2 to 3 weeks. So I think it's still possible, depending on how the construction on Roach Brothers proceeds. If it doesn't look like they're going to open up till the end of July, I think there'd be time to do it.
Well, it sounded like in the letter that they just wanted to put this off.
I think they were concerned that it was going to be a 2-month project and we wouldn't have it done and they'd have their opening and we wouldn't have the sidewalk.
So you're saying that there's still a window that we can get this done before they open?
It depends on what their schedule is. I mean, if they're going to be finished by mid-June, we might not be able to do it. I think Highway is concerned about doing it while school's in session.
Okay.
Oh, that would be good if they could do that.
Yeah, I think if they could work with them and demonstrate that it could be done by the time they open, depending on, we're going to have to play it by ear and see how fast they're progressing.
So is that something Ken will work with their Ted Canada or their lawyers? And
Sure, yeah.
Well, that'd be ideal. I just didn't want it, the Roach Brothers get discouraged and suddenly say, well, the heck with $30,000.
No, I think they were afraid that, they'd have their grand opening and we'd be having the sidewalk.
And that's been their concern ever since
point one, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be ideal.
All right.
That would be great.
Ken will kill me in the morning, but that's okay.
Tell them, no problem. Ken can take care of it. Piece of cake.
Thanks.
We have a letter from resident Joanne Bragg requesting the extension, or at least a study of the extension of the sidewalk on East Main Street from Robert Sproul Road up to Shaw's Supermarket. And I know we've talked about that off and on over the years and stuff like that.
It's a very difficult project. I think maybe after town meeting you need to get Ken to come in and sit down and talk about it, maybe with, I don't know, somebody from the county engineers or whoever, HNTB or whoever he uses as a consultant, because that whole area drains to that swamp or wetland, as they call them now, behind those houses, and it goes down behind the football field to that brook and then under South Street, and eventually it ends up in Kingsbury Pond.
Yeah.
If you put a sidewalk in and put vertical curbing and trap that water on 109, you're going to have a mess on your hands in the winter when you get icing.
Right.
Because you're going to have trapped the water. So you have to provide not just a sidewalk, you've got to provide a way to drain that entire area. And it's a fairly large area.
Well, how do we, because we've been talking about this, when I was a selectman back in the 80s, we were talking about this. Yes. That seems to be the missing link. If you can join Shaw's to Pound Street area, now you have a complete link. I see a lot of people, and it's scary, walking that section of Main Street coming back from Shaw's or Marshall's or anything.
Yeah, I do that myself a lot.
Is the area, is the answer then to work with the state, try to get some of the transportation bill, or if it's going to be...
I think probably we're going to have to come up with a design plan ourselves. Now, you might be able to use Chapter 90 money to do that with, But that's why I want to sit down and talk to Ken about that. To me, with the volume of traffic that road has, I think the state should pay to do whatever needs to be done.
So how do we get them to do that?
I think the first thing is you get a design, you take it to them and say, hey, look at, here it is. And then get our legislators to push to get it put on the list as a fundable project. Because it's $25,000 cars per day road.
Right.
It needs to be done, and it's not just Medfield residents who use that road, it's people from all over the area. And they paid to do the whole thing in Millis. I don't see, and I think they paid to do it in Westwood. Seems to me that they ought to be doing it in Medfield too, because it's the same cars that use it basically. So, but it's going to be a long term. I talked to Joanna and I said, this is probably going to take 10 years. By the time you get in line and get it on the 5-year master plan for the state, the first step is to try to come up with a design to do it. You're probably going to have easements to take because you've got to drain through people's properties to get it to the swamp. You got to make sure that the capacity of the brook behind the high school field is sufficient to handle the water you're going to be dumping in there. There's a lot of issues, and now you have the whole issue of stormwater management, which is a federal law. How do you handle that under the stormwater management issue? So it's not something where you go slap a piece of asphalt in,
right,
and you've got a sidewalk.
What's the cost to do a design? Is that, and I have no clue whatsoever.
I don't either, frankly.
The only thing I want to mention is I went to that, which I'll mention in the Selectmen reports, but I went to that MAPC breakfast, and one of the things they said is that again, this is the second year of the 2-year cycle, and the transportation bill is now in the Senate, and they said if you want to add any amendments, you still have a window of time to add an amendment to get that in. And I'm wondering if we could get something in that would give us the funds for a design for that. Is that something we could approach Senator Timilty with?
I think that transportation bill has become the ultimate pork barrel in state government now. It's up to, I don't know how many billions of dollars. They're throwing everything but the kitchen sink in there, so I don't know how much of that will actually survive.
Then, the question is Medfield getting its fair share of that pork barrel?
I'm perfectly willing to throw it in.
Wasilla, Alaska got $10 million of federal money, and we didn't get $10 million of federal money. But if
who did?
Wasilla, Alaska, when Sarah Palin was mayor.
Oh, well.
Well, Norwood...
Well,
Walpole just got $14 million for the design for reconstruction of Route 1A, Main Street.
Yeah. We had, probably $5 million for redoing South Street Extension when we did it. So,
but I'm just wondering, they said there's a window open. I'm wondering if it's worth approaching, or are we rushing?
Why don't we check with Denise and see what her take is on that?
It would be the Senate. It's already by the House. It would have to be Timothy, right?
Okay, we'll check with
Okay. So maybe if I give a call, something to the office tomorrow, just to see what, and then how would we know what even a cost of a design would be?
We could probably talk to one of our consultants that does that and come up with a rough estimate.
Let me just take it the first step and see if that's even a possibility.
Right.
Okay.
The whole issue of how the state money is allocated for the Chapter 90 purposes for the roads has been an area that I've been confused about, and our whole process in town of doing the management of our roads is an area that has confused me as well, and so that I've been suggesting that we have Ken come in and give us like a 101 presentation on here's how it works, here's how you get the money. I mean, these projects seem to sit on the Mass Highway time calendar for years, like North Street and Green Street have been. And it would be very nice to know how that's all done. Is it all political? Is it just a pro rata wait your turn type of situation? So there's that issue that I think that it would be nice to have Ken explain to us. The other thing, Ken was going to get us a list of what streets he was going to do in which order, so that people in town could have an idea as how soon their street would be, where their street was on the list. And I think it would be good to get Ken to give us that list. And also, I agree that this sidewalk is exceedingly important up to Shaw's. I think that it'd be good to have Ken give us a list of his next 5 sidewalk expansions as well. And know what his plans are in those areas, so that I think as selectmen, that's probably our task, is to review those and make sure that we're, as a policy matter, in agreement with that, and perhaps with the streets too. And I want to find out from Ken his pavement management plan, because after going to the MMA meetings, I'm very convinced that we really need a very sophisticated plan to maintain our streets. I know my street, before I became a selectman, so it was more than 12 years ago, they came through and they were doing crack sealing. The day ended and they didn't finish the street. And so that now there's some very large cracks in Copperwood Road, and others are less so. And I don't know how important it is to fill those cracks, to keep the pavement longer. I think that
it's important, yeah.
Yeah, that's my sense, because I've seen material that the MMA has been circulating to us about it. I know there's a whole article in, well, here it is. I've been carrying it around. Chapter 90, Making a Difference Where the Rubber Meets the Road, and that idea of the pavement management that you went to that seminar at the MMA. And so I think that it's important that we make sure that we do have a pavement management sense. And the whole area of the roads is an area that's just eluded me. I've never quite understood it, and it'd be very helpful if Ken could give us that Highway 101 course and explain the whole process to us, how he does it, and what his plans are for the future.
I think your point is well taken. I don't have that information either. Can we, is that a motion? Can we ask Ken to come in
Sure,
at one of the meetings?
We do that.
Okay, yeah, that's fine, all in favor?
So, aye.
Yep.
Next, we've got on the agenda, we've got the selectmen have received an invitation to attend the Girl Scout Gold Award ceremony on Saturday, March 29th at 1 p.m. in the Blake Middle School auditorium. Always a nice event each year and stuff like that. There are 6 young ladies are getting their gold awards this year, so it's excellent. So hopefully we'll be able to make that, and we'll RSVP. Licenses and permits. The Medfield Music Association is requesting permission to place signs promoting the annual Jazz Night to be held Wednesday, April 9th in the high school auditorium.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The high school girls field hockey team is requesting permission to conduct a fundraising car wash behind Town Hall on Saturday, May 17th.
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
It's funny to think of it being warm enough to
I know. It's
have
hard to
running water
believe. Yeah.
outdoors.
Forever Home Rescue New England is requesting a wine and malt beverage permit for their annual silent auction event on June 13th at the center.
So moved.
What is Forever Home Rescue New England?
It's a pet thing that's on Dale Street somewhere.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, pet rescue thing, yeah.
Occasionally you see these big semis, actually, almost.
Okay.
They're not quite like a semi, but there's huge trailer trucks
They
that come
said
into town on Saturdays.
One time they said they've done over 3,500 animals have gone through there. I think they bring a lot of them up from down south.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I went to the event last year. It was really a great time. They had one of the anchors. God, I can't think of any because I don't want Channel 4. One of the co-anchors there is very much involved in it, and she was there to kind of MC the night. It was really good.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
A request is made for a common victual license from Adam Katz, resident of Franklin, to operate the All-Star Hot Dog Wagon.
Where?
212 Main Street, wherever that
And where's
is.
Is the Sunoco station? Isn't it?
In the Sunoco
That's
station.
yeah.
Is that what it is? Okay. All right.
He still has to go through the Board of Health process.
To get all the permits. That's the really hard. That's
Subject
to them.
their approval.
Yeah.
Is this inside the lobby of the Sunoco? Is this an
No, it's
outside
outside.
facility?
It's outside.
I think it's similar.
Wagon like the one down on Will's
Will's.
Hardware? Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not the same guy that's at Will's, is it?
No, it is
No,
Steve
no,
Scanlon's the
this fellow
guy.
is starting, his own, and there are some issues with Board of Health.
Yeah, it's definitely it's not. Yeah, got quite
Not a
some
done
high
deal.
stuff. It isn't.
So it's good.
Yeah.
Okay. I would, so moved.
Well, pending the Board of Health, I second.
Yeah. Okay. All in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
Good, thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Does the police chief have to do anything with that or anything?
No.
It's just Board of Health?
Just food, yeah. That's it. For the visual license, it's just the board.
With this, there's nothing that would deal with the police chief or anything with it?
No.
Okay.
Next thing, maybe we'll get some food wagons parking on the street in downtown.
There we go. Selectmen's report, Mr. Peterson.
I had a session with Jack Peterson at Medfield TV
Righty.
and Josh Perry, who's the editor of the Hometown
Yeah, very nice.
Weekly, and it was all about the state hospital purchase. Again, the Medfield Foundation Volunteer of the Year event is on the reception to honor the people that have been nominated and chosen is on March 23, 3 to 5 at the center. It's a very interesting time to listen to these, because what happens is that the people who nominated the volunteers and the volunteers talk about why they nominated and why they do their volunteer work. And you get a chance to hear these very interesting stories about volunteer work that you didn't know was going on in town, like our cameraman,
Yes.
Wesley, who's nominated.
Yes.
What else? We have a warrant article about doing solar photovoltaic, and so that I actually, and this was something that grew out of an energy committee meeting several years ago now, where the town administrator from Dartmouth came up and explained how he's been doing these, and he's done 7 of them at that time down in Dartmouth. And the main thing that he recommended was talking to get the right attorney, and he even gave us the name of the attorney that he used. And so I called that attorney, and I got information from him, and it's all still very feasible to do. It's more feasible on brownfields sites, such as the former dump, or sites of that sort, but it's still economic, and it's still worth pursuing.
When I was at that breakfast, I got to talk to the Selectman Canton. He said they did that exact same thing on their own landfill, and they're now actually having surplus money coming back into the town.
Yeah.
In Canton.
We haven't been doing it because Mike is concerned, and Mark Sorrell is concerned about doing it on the landfill until it's been closed for like 20 or 30 years or something. We got another 3 or 4 years to go. And
It's never been officially closed by the state.
this this attorney said, talk to the people in Situate, because they did the same thing. And all you need to do is get a consultant to go in and say that it'll work. And apparently it doesn't sound like it's a big deal. But there's another issue with our landfill. I know that a private company was soliciting the Water and Sewer Board for their sites, and they thought the former dump was too small a site.
Yeah.
And so it may not be feasible for that reason.
For commercial use, Bob McDonald is looking into it as a site to provide power for the treatment plant.
Oh, good.
And,
Excellent.
the potentially big savings there. One of the biggest savings is if you can reduce your demand charge. If you're familiar with the way the demand charges work, but they can be as much as half of your utility bill. So if you can have a solar facility that supplements the power at your plant
During
and
the peak
reduce your
times.
demand,
Yeah.
You can save a lot of money on your energy.
How much land do they have at the...
It's about a 2.1 acre site they have there. But it's cleared, it's fenced in, it faces south, so it's got a lot of advantages. So he's going to work on that.
Good.
So
That's
to have
very
this
exciting.
solar photovoltaic issue go forward, all we need to do is ask the town meeting to give the Board of Selectmen, the town, the authority to contract for more than 3 years. Because apparently you need to, most of these contracts are 20 or 30 years.
Sure, yeah.
He was saying that it's usually 20 years with 2 5-year extensions, so.
So we're at least a year off? 'Cause that would not take place this town meeting.
Well, we have a warrant article that's in, on the warrant.
No, they have warrant articles to change the zoning.
Just to change them to allow photovoltaic.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
I proposed that we have a warrant article, but then maybe it didn't make the final cut.
Yeah, was it on that list? And I asked anybody who had changes to let me know. So it wasn't on the list. We
It
are.
was on the list originally, I know, but then maybe it didn't make the final cuts.
If we have a town meeting in the fall or the winter for the public safety building and you want to put it on, you might have more information available then to do it. You'd have the details of what you're proposing.
Yeah, well, all you need is this permission to contract. That's the key.
Well, I think people would want to know where you were putting it, you know, if it was going to affect their neighborhoods or, you know. I think
My
they'd
thought was you
probably-
put it in Rentham, you put it in Franklin, you don't put it in Medfield. You don't, it doesn't have to be in town, it just needs to be in the same ISO district that Medfield is in, and those are very large.
Yeah.
What you do, what the guy in Dartmouth is doing, is you just write a request for proposals and say that the town will buy the solar generated power. Third parties come in and respond to that, and he's, I think the number that he was making $2 million on it. He was making a lot of money.
Excellent.
Well, the town where you were proposing to put it would have to be zoned to permit it.
Well, that's all the third parties issue. You know,
Yeah.
we don't do any of this other than to put out a proposal. We spend, he spent, I think, $30,000. It's very short money that he was spending to do this, and then he would sit back and just evaluate the proposals and do the contract.
Excellent.
Is that current article open enough that you can interpret, or this has to be a new separate article, we'd have to wait till the fall?
I think under the purchasing laws, any lease in excess of 3 years, it's the same type of thing, you know, on Lot 3 on Ice House Road, you need to get permission from the town to lease in excess of 3 years.
So the wording that Pete wants would have to come as a separate article, and if we had a fall town meeting, it could be put in at that time.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think it would be
Yeah.
good to have everyone understand exactly what they'd be voting for, too. Yeah.
I didn't realize that had been taken out. That's too bad.
Yeah, it was on that list. That's why I sent the list out early to have everybody review it and get back to me. So.
Well, I know it was on one of the early lists, and then I just didn't notice that it got taken out. Oh, well, we'll have to do it another time then. And that's, let's see, what else? Oh, the Medfield Cares About Prevention group had a meeting, and we're looking to bring Attorney Richard Campbell to town to talk about the issue of social host liability. Serve alcohol to underage kids and lose your home, basically.
Is he the one
Lose
that's
your
been here?
pension.
Hasn't he been here a couple of times before?
Apparently, he has been here before. I did not hear him. But it would be a dual presentation with someone from the Campbell office and Susan Cowell from the High School Wellness Program, talking about the Metro West Adolescent Health Survey, which is where the kids talk about all their, it's an anonymous survey of alcohol use, drug use, those sorts of things.
I didn't go to that session, but I watched it on cable, and which anyone with a teenager should be very scared, and it should be at one of those hearings if you find out the potential liability. That and there have actually been parents that have gone to jail for allowing liquor to be served in their houses, and kids have been, you know, found dead. And so
There's a
it's
huge
very big
liability that
responsibility.
if you have the kids over and have them drink in your basement and take away their car keys.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, there's a second set of car keys. Someone dies, and you lose your house and your pension. And
Yes, yeah. And there have been even cases where the parents weren't home, and the kids have a party, and they get into the liquor cabinet. And
there was an SJC case a year or two ago that put a pretty severe limit around the parental liability. It said that the parents really had to supply the alcohol, and it drew the limit. And if you didn't supply the alcohol, you didn't have the liability. Actually, Campbell was representing the people that were trying to establish liability in that case, and
lost it.
The Supreme Judicial Court just said that our society was not ready to allow liability in those instances.
Excellent.
So
Richard,
that's it. Thank you.
Richard?
Yeah, several things. I had the utility meetings, which I have monthly with Comcast, Verizon, and N-Star. Comcast is about 90% off of the poles. There's some individual ones that they have to work on. Verizon is right on their doorstep. They're actually ahead of schedule. N-Star, we have a number of poles that all the wires are off. N-Star actually started removing some of the poles last month, but it was so cold that they were snapping off.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So they have to wait a little bit till the ground thaws. So they're still on schedule. I'm just very pleased that the cooperation that the three utilities are showing, that they're still saying by the end of spring, all the double poles will be removed from Medfield. So
That's terrific.
that went well. I had my first of the meetings with the surrounding town selectmen. I went over to Millis.
Oh, yeah.
A nice group, very positive reception with them over there. It's interesting, Millis already does, and the reason I'm going to the other selectmen is trying to see if we can get the surrounding towns to cooperate. We can work such as sharing information, sharing services, sharing equipment, almost a form of regionalizing to try to give the community greater efficiency and try to save the town some money. Can we share some things? It's interesting, Millis already shares their animal control officer with Medway, which had some success. They were sharing a street sweeper, but they stopped because they said they had an issue of the street sweeper. Both towns wanted it at the exact same time, when the winter is out. So there were some issues with that. But what I suggested is that each town appoint one member, and then hopefully we can get 7 towns or 4 or 5 or 6, however numbers are willing to join together with that. And the question became, should it be a town resident that has nothing to do with town government, or should it be a town official who knows a lot about the town? And Millis actually thought they would like to probably appoint one of the selectmen. I was more thinking if you got someone outside, then they're coming in with a fresh look. They don't have. I mean, every town has turf wars. Every town wants to protect their equipment, their services. That's the nature of New England. The rest of the country has a county system. Right. We really never had that, and so we're very protective of our equipment and our services and our personnel. But Millis was very receptive with that. I told them I was hoping that by the summer we could get at least the committee of all the different towns together, and at which time, between now and then, they're going to think of who they're going to appoint for a member. So I'm going to go over to Medway on the 17th of March, I believe, and then we're waiting to see the other town when I can book. Unfortunately, some of the other towns also meet on Tuesday, so they have to try to get me on that Tuesday, the second, no, it's the second Tuesday?
Second Tuesday.
Second Tuesday, to get that in. So I was very pleased over there, a nice group that's there. I also attended the ZBA hearing on the Clock Tavern. The change there is no longer are they looking for the B&B. It's simply the tavern part that's there. Additional meeting will be held. I believe they're going to have another site visitation there as well.
They set a date for that, when they're gonna
The next meeting?
Yeah.
I forget, I have it written down. It's, I believe in March.
Sometime.
19th of March.
Okay.
I went to the town meeting walkthrough with Scott McDermott. They're preparing for a record crowd. They have the cafeteria and classrooms ready for overflow that's there. And what they're going to try, because as you know, when you come into town meeting, the way the town clerk has the registration set up, it's sideways in the hall and it's very confusing. They're going to move it out into the lobby. So you have to face and then go in, and there's no question, is someone sneaking by?
Yep.
So that hopefully will work well. I went to the that Three Rivers Interlocal Council breakfast, and they're a sub-regional group of the Metropolitan Planning Council. I went there with Gil Rogers of the hospital committee. The new representative, Sean Dooley, was there, as were the legislative aides of Representative Garlick and Senator Timilty. There are other state reps there as well. They updated that transportation bill, and that's when I got that information that there's a window of opportunity. They also said that both House and Senate has funded that $300 million that the governor vetoed on the Chapter 90 funds, and they believe the governor will not veto. They believe they have enough votes now to override the governor's veto on that. So hopefully Medfield will be getting additional funds under Chapter 90 on that. And it was just interesting talking to the other selectmen. I talked to both the selectmen and the planners from Needham, Milton, Stoughton, and Dedham. And it was interesting, just their views on some things, especially the planner from Milton, of whether or not several communities have like a review, an architectural or aesthetic review, a board that's a standing committee in the town. So before someone goes to the planning board, they go to this board first, which is a voluntary board, but because they have a lot of influence on the planning board, they get a lot of power and respect of what type of design of buildings and stores and fronts and sidewalks and things should take place. We don't have that. And I'm wondering down the road whether that's something we should begin to look at. But
I think design review, it would be very useful for the town to control the visual aspects of the town. I remember years ago seeing a picture of the McDonald's in Monterey, California, and it was gorgeous. It was all half-timbered, and so you can get people to build things that are decent looking.
Yeah, we've been pretty lucky here. I mean, if you look at the Starbucks next door.
We're very lucky.
If you look at the even what they did on the Dunkin' Donuts, the Rockland Trust Bank was Ben Franklin. They did a nice job on that, so.
Well, some of it, and both the Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks, is because they were in historic districts, and the Historic District Committee had some influence on that. Same with the Gulf Cumberland Farms.
Yeah.
Yes.
That original design was terrible, and they were able. That's a fairly attractive building right now.
Yeah, yeah.
So you're right. We do have some luck on those that are in the historic district, but I think just overall in the town, that may be something to look at. And
it does have to be voluntary, though.
It is voluntary, correct.
Yeah.
But I think just the fact that as a developer, you have to go there first, and then you have to go to the planning board, and the planning board kind of looks. It's giving a little influence there.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it'd be something. Yeah, it would be important to see if the planning board, if there's something that they were made sense for them.
Absolutely.
Because they'd have to really buy into that and
Absolutely.
feel comfortable with that. Otherwise, it's a waste of
Right.
be a waste of
Absolutely.
time.
They would have to buy totally into that.
You have to be a little careful now with the green communities legislation. To be designated as a green community, you have to agree that all your permits will be approved within a year. So you can't delay the process, stretch out the process too much by running it by too many committees, or you'll violate the green communities.
Well, I don't think you wanted to. I think you want to get a reputation that you can come into Medfield, get your permits, and open up.
Yeah.
I don't think we want to have a reputation of delay.
I wouldn't think so, no.
And I'm wondering, as I sat at that meeting, listening to, that there's this window of opportunity to get an amendment in with the transportation, whether or not, and I don't know if any other towns do that, if we could have like a liaison, if there'd be a citizen in the town, maybe that's into state government, that'd be willing to just be kind of a contact person that, I don't think we have the time to keep up with all that's going on, and certainly our reps and senators are very busy to...
We did have, through the MAPC for a while, we had Tony Santori was kind of keeping tabs on that, but he finally gave it up. But yeah, if you get somebody like that that's got the time to go in and the inclination to go into Boston or to go to the MAPC meetings.
We'll just be on the phone with the reps from, now Dooley and Garlick and Timothy.
Who's very helpful with that is John Nunnery. He's a lobbyist for the
with his
Boston Society of Architects.
He does have nice...
and he's been very helpful in keeping us abreast of what's been going on in there.
So do you think it's worth our while to just put it out if there is someone interested dealing with state government of keeping track what's out there so that Medfield, we can get in on anything that would be beneficial to the town?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. I also had a really nice opportunity to go into Wentworth Institute. If you remember, there was an architecture class out of Wentworth that came down, they got permission, they got into the chapel at Medfield State Hospital, and he had 8 teams of students. These are architect students. And each student had to come up with a plan to design the chapel, the infirmary, and the clubhouse, that area. And some of them were told it was going to be a community college, a culinary arts school, a medical facility, and a visitor center. And I went in with Steve Nolan and Gil Rogers, and you should have seen the stuff that they
Really
produced
nice,
there. It just was really impressive. Especially, I really get into the visitor center, but they had galleries there for art galleries, and they had history galleries of history of mental illness of the state hospital for the town of Medfield. Maybe the Historical Society could move there. Particular things maybe that Medfield wanted to do, like history of the King Philip War, and they had a museum store and a cafe, and they had a lot of glass designs. But it was real interesting just seeing what they did. And they're like halfway through. They're gonna open this up in April to anyone in Medfield, or town officials, or any residents that have the final products. And you can actually, they had the models to scale that were there. So that I thought was very interesting. And we also have, and I've just gotten a couple of emails, there's two individuals that have been up for the past couple of years doing paintings up in the hospital of the buildings of the Hill, and they want to put on, they have an extensive number of paintings. They're looking at late 2014, maybe early 2015, to put a show on of all their artwork, focusing solely on the hospital.
They talked to Bill Pope.
No,
They
no.
should be a good source.
Well, it wasn't Bill, but they actually were thinking of putting it on in the State House.
Oh.
And then they were debating, well, maybe it'd be better if it was local in Medfield. But they're working on that, but there's a proposal I'll bring back to the board at a later date.
Yeah, I think either that or perhaps the Dwight Derby House might be open or something.
Derby
like
House
that,
might be
too,
nice.
yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
We've had a couple of art things
That's
there
there,
before.
too, yeah.
It makes a nice flow as you
Yeah,
walk
you've
around
got the
through the
room
house
there with
there.
the different rooms. Good room.
Here's a concern I had. I received an email from a lady that asked me an interesting question, and I've actually thought about this before. Does Medfield know what is transported over the rails and tracks that go by the Wheelock water wells through our center of town? Is it CSX that?
CSX rail, yeah.
And well, her question was, one, could we get someone from CSX? Because I told her, we tried this before, and we basically could not get an answer from them of what exactly is on.
They tell you that they're covered under federal law, and they don't have to tell you.
Under federal law, they don't have to tell you?
We have no jurisdiction over rails. It's all controlled by the federal government. And I've talked to the fire chief about this. You know, they do have a book that the fire department has, and they update it once in a while, where they have to have labels if there's any hazardous waste on a car. They have to have a little label on it, and it tells you whether it's chlorine or, you know, whatever. But you have to be awfully fast to, you know, try to read them on 100 cars that go through. But in terms of them notifying us in advance, they'll tell you that, no, they won't do it.
There's a siding up near where I live, and when I used to run, before the Kingsbury Club, I used to oftentimes run down along the tracks, and you would see piles of material on the tracks that were just the most unusual colors. And so I have no clue as to what they were, but, you know,
Like
oranges
liquid
and bright
head,
greens.
liquid head,
It wasn't liquid, it was just piles of powders is what I would see.
Yeah.
But I had no clue as to what they were, other than the fact that they were just remarkable.
That you could do something about. You could call DEP on that, you know, but what's in the cars as they pass through, we wouldn't have any jurisdiction over. But if there were
Yeah.
materials
They used to use
spilled
that,
on the ground,
they used to use
certainly would
that
have.
siding up there to put trains together, and you'd hear them at night. They'd be whacking the cars in there, and maybe when they were jostling them, they were losing some of the load.
Would it be worth our while to get a CSX representative to come in here, or is he just going to say federal law says we don't have to tell you?
Good luck. We're trying to get them to fix the
crossing?
the crossing gates down there. We're having trouble, and the crossing. So
Well,
it's tough. You know, I think probably the first step to do would be to have the fire chief come in and ask him to tell you what his procedures are.
That would be a good idea. And the other thing, because do we have, what if, because if there was ever a spill by the Wheelock, we have, our wells are right there. I mean, there goes a chunk of our water supply. Do we have any, which I'd like to ask the chief, maybe the police chief, and it may be water and sewer, but do we have a contingency plan of if something like that, have we do mock disaster
they've
or
done
something?
mock drills, yes.
We do, so we
Yeah.
know what to do and stuff like that.
And they've had a couple of mock drills down at the center.
Some mock drills and a
Medfield, yeah.
couple of tabletop exercises.
So if something like that happened, at least our chiefs are
Yeah.
ready to go.
The one I can think we actually had an incident was at, I don't know, it was Corning or Bayer or whatever it's called at the time, where somebody slammed the door of a refrigerator that held chemicals over there, and it crashed inside. The shelf fell, and the vials that were on it crashed, and they had people in white suits and hazardous waste vehicles all over. They blocked off all the streets in the center, and it turned out nothing came of it, but it was quite an operation that they had going up there one afternoon.
So maybe then, maybe after town meeting, if we could have the chief come in and just kind of brief us on that.
Yeah.
That'd be very interesting.
I went to trivia night, which was sponsored by the Medfield High School Alumni Association, and the Fisher table was the #1, the smartest table there on trivia.
Smartest group in town that night.
But we sold out, and more than enough money that'll go to 2 Medfield High School scholarships. Wes, you can put in for them to help you in the college. I went to, with Selectman Peterson, the Blue and Gold banquet for Pack 113, which was actually my pack when I was in
excellent.
Cub Scouts.
Alrighty.
I was 113, so it was nice to be back there.
You didn't wear your cap?
Cheap cap or something like your uniform.
I also was interviewed by Jack Peterson with Max Bowen of Medfield Press on Medfield TV. And just to remind Pete, the Tom and Kathy Powers on Elm Street will be doing the March mini town hall, and they were going to send you some possible dates to see if that fits your schedule. And the last thing, which I actually picked up at the Selectmen's Convention, which I thought was very interesting, it's called Opt Out of Yellow Pages. And as you know, they dump the yellow pages at the end of your driveway, and that's environmentally, a lot of people just end up throwing that. There's a way that you can opt out. If you don't want it, they can, they actually have a list as they go down the street. And I'm just wondering where the best avenue, what the best avenue is, a town board or something that
Medfield
can
Green.
get Medfield Green?
I think so.
You know
I think
who's
that
in
would be
charge
right
of
up their
that?
alley, yeah. I know Megan Sullivan is involved, and there's a bunch of others.
Yeah,
that
she's not chairman this year, but we can work through her.
If I give this to you, I just thought it was
Yeah.
just a great idea of people that,
That's fine.
don't want it, what a waste, it sits in the end of your driveway, and you can eliminate that.
Save a lot of stuff at the transfer station.
Yeah.
So
This
just
actually,
get
I'll
them
double
thrown
check, this
away.
actually
Yeah.
may be on there, they produce a publication of where to bring things and where to recycle things. If it's not on their list, I'll have them add this to their list.
Okay. And that's all, Mr. Chairman.
Good, thank you. We've got, so we got a couple things, obviously, just to remind everyone, as we talked about tonight, too, that we've got a big town meeting coming up, obviously, next Monday at 7:30 at the high school, so it'd be very important for everyone to come so we can really have a meaningful discussion about a thing that's very important for Medfield, which is obviously the state hospital and stuff. As Richard had mentioned, too, we had a nice night on Saturday night for the Alumni Association for the trivia quiz. It was kind of fun, and it was particularly terrific to beat the Thompson family table. That really made it worthwhile. They had won the last 2 years in a row, right? And probably
Yes,
before, I don't know.
going for the hat trick.
Yeah.
Now, was Mr. Sullivan on the Thompson?
He's always on the
is he?
Thompson team.
So-
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's, I guess, a honorary Thompson or something like that. So we beat them by 1.5 points. So it was pretty. It was right down to the wire. It was the last set of questions. There were 5 or 6 teams in contention there, and we just happened to for whatever reason, luck out and get some right answers.
It's a great night out. I mean, people bring their own food, and it's
the food was unbelievable.
yeah. Some of them even wear costumes. And, they've got,
Yeah, we did. We were trying to ramp up. I think the other teams next year will continue to keep working on the food thing. We did bring. We had a little Samoa fondue thing going in the middle of the table. Yeah, so we had marshmallows going, and
The fire chief was eyeing that.
Just keeping an eye on it, to make sure we didn't burn the Legion down. So that was kind of fun to do. Like I said, it's really a great time. Everyone has a really good time, and they do run. Yeah. You guys run it very good. It's right on time. You're done at 10:30 or something like that. So it's not a late night and stuff. So it worked out pretty good. I did go a week or so ago on a Thursday night. Was over the McQuillan's house on Harding Street for the the regional the town meetings and stuff. Had a great conversation with everyone over there. Nice group, and we spent really the whole evening, obviously talking about the state hospital since they all live right next door. So I think it was very helpful. So they could just kind of clear on the facts and kind of what we were trying to accomplish and what the purpose of the town meeting was. So and what we were just trying to do at a step at a time type thing to kind of get things done. So thought that went well, and like I said, we had a nice evening. Nice evening there. I think these Thursdays start up this first Thursday, so Zulu Gallery is open. I think they have an artist reception this Thursday, too.
Yeah, I think 5:30 to 7.
Yeah. So folks, if you're thinking, I know the weather's still so lousy, but hopefully it'll be a little warmer and stuff, but it'd be great to make sure people get out and support the gallery. It's always a very nice time. And it gets even nicer once the weather's nicer and we're out on the roof deck and stuff. And I think that is about it as far as, like I said, we got a busy month. Got a busy couple months coming up.
Mr. Chairman, could I just add, on Saturday, just one other announcement, from 11 to 1, if anybody still wants a tour of the hospital, myself and John Thompson, if you want to meet up at the security trailer, you can park probably on the sledding hill side. So if you've not been up to Medfield State Hospital and you want to get a tour before town meeting, we'll start at 11 o'clock on Saturday. The weather's actually supposed to be half decent for a change.
Good. Excellent.
Mr. Chairman, could I also mention that the Medfield High School Jazz Band has once again been named a finalist in the Essentially Ellington competition at Lincoln Center in New York City. I guess Medfield is one of just 15 jazz bands across North America to have earned a spot. The last time the band went to Ellington was in 2012. They'll be performing before the start of the special town meeting on March 10. I guess the Medfield Music Association is helping to raise scholarship money for the trip so that no band member will be left behind. And they can accept donations at Box 115 in Medfield.
Excellent. Good. Oh, and I did want to throw in a plug. I thank you for thinking that, too, just in conjunction with town meeting, too. Medfield TV will be there broadcasting. I'm still going to do the remote broadcast right into the overflow rooms and stuff like that, so that people don't have to be concerned about having space, so that if the gym fills up, right, they'll be able to go, I guess, into the cafeteria or whatever.
If the gym fills, we'll go into the cafeteria, and there'll be counters in both rooms, so votes will be counted.
So good. So
And
plenty of room.
Am I correct? Did you hear that? Am I correct that the bus, if there's seniors that don't want to get up with the traffic, can go to the center and there'll be a bus to transport? Is that true or false?
I believe they usually do that.
I believe that they were going to ask Roberta to offer that service, but I don't know if
We're
that's
not
been
sure.
confirmed yet. We can
Okay, 'cause
confirm
I
that.
heard that, but I didn't know if that was official.
Yeah, I don't know if it's been confirmed yet.
Okay.
They were suggesting, because there's so much ice and snow, that it's hard to block off any parking right at the entrance, to make a short walk in there. So the chief and I were talking about maybe making that an opportunity, but I'll follow up.
So it'd be best if somebody to call the center and ask, would that be the best avenue?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think
I'll call Roberta in the morning and see if she can do that.
And I know one of the town meetings, they tried to block off an area for seniors that was closer to the front entrance, so they wouldn't have to walk as far. So I'm not sure they were that successful with it, but
It wasn't successful, and we're so worried about the ice.
Yeah.
You get the snow banks and everything now.
If anyone is young and healthy, it would be kind of them to park further away and walk a little bit further to allow some of the older people to park closer to the front entrance.
So appreciate that.
It's a courtesy.
I have one announcement from the town clerk, and
Yes.
she wanted to remind the listening audience that the last day to register to vote for the annual town meeting is April 8th.
April 8th for the
We've had
April
a-
town meeting, yeah.
Yeah, if you have not registered. We've had a lot of requests for people to vote absentee at the special town meeting.
Yes.
You have to be present to vote at town meeting. You can vote absentee ballot at the election,
But
you
not
have
at the
to be
town meeting.
present at town meeting.
Did she have the final registration date for the town election?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I'd have to look. But I think
Is it
that's
passed? Is it
Steve's
passed
And she
already?
materials here.
posted that a while ago.
Yeah,
Okay.
that has passed.
We have all the budgets in now. Was working on those figures this afternoon, and I'll try to get them out to you this week, so I think we've been putting so much attention on the special, we've kind of neglected the annual, and we need
I
to get
know,
moving
yeah.
on that. Actually, your next meeting will be the warrant committee hearing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's like unbelievable, huh?
Yes.
Oh, you have no idea.
Yeah, I know, because we don't even have to do anything. You guys do all the work. We just
So-
kind of show up and
And I'm going to
say hi.
And I talked to Gus, and I'm going to try to go to the warrant committee meeting next week to sit down and start
Yeah.
going over the figures, and I'll get those figures to you people so we have an idea of where we have to go. We have some problems this year. The health insurance rates are going up 8.8%. We have a big increase in workers' comp, although I think we can get that down somewhat. But there are some of the things that we want to do are expensive, and it's going to be a tight budget this year.
Yeah, those increases are obviously going to cut into
Yes.
some of the town operating budgets, unfortunately. Yeah. Excellent. All
I
righty.
would just remind people that I have office hours this Friday,
This
first
Friday?
Friday of the month at the center, 9 o'clock. If anybody has any issues they'd
Yeah.
like to come and talk about.
Good. Excellent. All righty. I think we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Production support provided by Medfield.tv. Access to our community.